not as, oh,
Oh, here we go.
Oh, we're going to go live soon. Oh, I'm glad I gave you the up. I was like, that's what I want. I wanted to give an update. All right.
What is our link, my friend?
All right. Okay, good. Here we are. There we go.
so do we just stay in the Zoom and then it?
Yeah, just stay in the
We
Zoom.
do. We are recording now, and
Oh,
we will be able to see questions and, of course, ask each other questions as we go.
Yes. Okay, so we are live. There's a little bit of delay happening. And that's cool. Card off.
Hi, everyone. We are so excited to be live. We are gonna vamp for a hot minute while we wait for folks to trickle over and click the link. We are so excited to be able to have some time to take your questions and satisfy your curiosities. We've got an eye on chat here in YouTube and can read off. But while we're getting started, thank you guys so much for these really engaging and wonderful kind of glimpses into your larger projects. And so I think what we'll do to get started as we wait for some questions to come in is ask each of you to tell us how this ties into kind of larger stuff or things that you didn't get to say in the limited time that Emily and I gave you for this presentation. What's one thing you'd like us to know additionally?
say what I can go first.
Yeah,
Okay.
you know what this is, so yeah,
Okay.
go.
So hi, Les Alexander, EEA, all of those work. And I think the one thing, so to start big picture wise, what I do as a researcher in getting my PhD currently in English is I'm looking at the long 18th and 19th century kind of traditional archive and the way that that gets transformed into these new media representations. And I'm particularly interested in queer femininity and the way that shows up, because in queer studies, more often than not, we see feminists as this thing that's either inherently attached to butch and or doesn't exist prior to America in the 1940s, which I find to be just feels like a really incomplete wrestling with what femininity has meant historically, especially in terms of queerness. And so one thing I think I wish I had more time to explore, and something that there's an article version of this talk coming out hopefully at the end of this year, is what are the specific ways that Rue is able to embody, and Montoya through Rue, a femme erotic subjectivity in ways that aren't inherently just like the romantic sexual relationship with Hobb, but also in these erotic platonic moments of intimacy with players like Binks and Abria's Wavi, which I think there's maybe been frustration about. Oh, why weren't they in game instead of Rue and Hobb? And I think I offer kind of an alternative to that as like, this is still just as valuable, and here is why, and here's what it's doing.
Yeah, thank you. Sylvan, what's the larger context for what you're talking about today?
So for mine, I only kind of got to hint a little bit at it, but, I bring up the materialism in the video, but I think that there is a realm of, information to discuss on the kind of ecological, environmental importance that is really not possible to tackle in a small space. But for the season itself, I really loved highlighting the acts between, like, the performance between Brennan Lee Mulligan and the character KP Hobb, and then the physical objects in game and metaphorical objects in game, that there are all of these like completely entwined and entangled together, so much so that you can't really tell them apart, and that can show us in the long run how important environment is, not only in stories, but how these storied matters are important for us today and kind of moving on.
Yeah, thanks, Sylvan. Austin, I know you're the one non-Austin person, name notwithstanding, here in this presentation. So, how do you connect this to your larger work in this kind of way?
Yeah, thank you. I largely work in games. That's my primary area of focus. Games writ large, but specifically contemporary video games, as far as what my dissertation project is, and racial narratives and racial ideologies that can be played out in different contemporary games. And simultaneously, that I've been, particularly Dimension 20, but of actual plays in general, been a sort of a big fan for the last couple of years. I think because a lot of people have discovered this community in recent years. And with that discovery, there's been this longer through line of seeing how these narratives that I'm interested in contemporary video games and digital media have this longer thread and this longer tail in tabletop RPGs. And then, backwards and further backwards and so on into how gamic representations have that, particularly narratively, have that connection. Increasingly, what I found interesting about this project and what I'm increasingly interested in is not so much the narratives, but more the mechanics of different games can have their own ideologies embedded within them. And that's what I found so satisfying about this project was how can we reconceptualize, how does Abria's DMing style allow us to reconceptualize the narrative priorities that become hegemonic through play with these different rule sets, and how does she use the rules of play as written to reimagine those and to challenge those in different ways for a more inclusive table.
Yeah, and it's
Great.
so interesting to connect kind of your interest with mechanics as story engines and limiters and expanders to the kind of materiality of what Sylvan is talking about when those mechanics become embodied in a particular kind of way.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Our next question from the chat is, what is your favorite class to play? And you can do D&D or you can go elsewhere. I mean, I will just start that, like, when given my druthers, I go ranger. But I will do other things as needed. So I've done sorcerer, I've done artificer and stuff, but maybe because of I've been thinking druid, but that's a whole,
Because druids are dope.
because you're trying to convert, yeah, you're
that's-
slowly converting me. Yeah.
All part casters are dope as hell. All prepared casters rock. The end. But there are other good things. What do you guys
Yeah.
play?
I'll go because it's very quick. I'm the forever DM, so I rarely get to play in my groups. I always DM. The handful of times I do, I do like to play monks a lot. But
Hey.
Yeah.
I am absolutely the cleric. I will gravitate towards a cleric every time, but it's, that's the first one to get hit and I'm like, yeah, go for it. But I love it.
Mine makes a lot of sense in a lot of ways. I'm 5'2" and have always had issues with managing my emotional excess. And so I either play a rogue or a barbarian or a rogue barbarian multi-class in pretty much every game I play, which people find interesting. They're like, how can you be a rogue and a barbarian? And I'm just like, have you watched Hellboy? Like, there's plenty of options here. At least that's
Rage-
how I interpret it.
Rage
So
comes from many places.
exactly.
It's
So.
true. I mean, hell, there's Fury of the Small if we're going to stay in D&D. But let's not, shall we? Because our next question is a great one that I think draws us to the kind of good society side of A Court of Fae and Flowers, which is, are there other small TTRPGs that you'd like to share that you think are particularly strong? And we'll start with you guys, and then I know Em and I have some suggestions for some Austin-inspired goodness as well. But we'll run cleanup for you guys.
I guess I would, okay, I'm not sure what we're qualifying as small.
Oh,
That would
academic
be-
panel means we can nuance this.
Because for context, I grew up playing pretty much nothing but D&D. And so I was in my late teens, early 20s before I really understood that there were other options, which is, there's more context there that makes it even funnier. So for me, it was realizing that I could do I didn't have to try and half-ass a vampire into Dungeons and Dragons. I could just play Vampire the Masquerade. I know that's not a small game, But for me, it was mind blowing to realize like, oh, I can do this, or like I can do something like Call of Cthulhu, which has then led me into smaller games. But more often than not, they've been homebrews with some of my best friends that have taken bigger systems like a Vampire the Masquerade or Call of Cthulhu and said, okay, but what if we set this in this world? Like a few years ago, I don't know if anyone's seen Hackers with like Johnny Lee Miller. And okay, we took that world setting, but did Call of Cthulhu and like homebrewed our own like situation. So that's my favorite thing to do, is to like take what might be big and make it small for like my exact interests.
Fabulous.
Uh,
Austin, Sylvan?
Yeah, for me, I'm actually right here. My wife and I have been playing through this collection right here, which is fabulous. It's called You and I, and it's role-playing games for two. And it's just a collection of about 20-ish, 20 to 30 independent, relatively short games, most lasting between like an hour and 4 hours, all designed for just two people.
That's lovely. Sylvan, you got some suggestions for
So,
us?
I'm not really sure, but because I again as well have been, very much in D&D. And so, the only things that I've really, had for interactive before was just quick games. I remember, stressing out about having to play games like Coup or games like One Night as a Werewolf because of the trying to interact and pretend to be something that I may not be. But honestly, I don't know any other TT RPG games that I could think of beyond
Yeah.
D&D.
There are a couple for folks
Yes.
who are particularly Austin inclined that we would be remiss if we did not mention. First of all, Story Brewers has an excellent free game, the makers of Good Society, which you can find on their
Get
website,
it.
which is a game of, oh, how can we put it? Oh, friendly
Yeah.
blackmail among
Yeah,
sisters.
it's so good.
Yeah.
The fictional memoirs of Harriet Wilson and her sisters.
Real life courtesan of the Regency era, and in fact, indeed, an entire family of these courtesans. And as a kind of retirement policy, they wrote their memoirs and
Mhm.
wrote letters to their former kind of intrigues, encouraging them to cough up if they didn't want the publicity. And it is a game of letter writing in that way, as you tell the story of your memoirs through kinds of flashbacks, as well as write these kinds of memoirs. Also, I think Emily and I can both highly recommend for anyone who's looking to add their Regency to any game system. Chaosium's Regency Cthulhu is among the best kind of setting, not only for kind of Austin's kind of thematics, which Good Society does so well, but Austin's larger world and the larger society that she's working in. Of course,
Yeah.
you can have your cosmic horror, or you can take
Yeah.
that information and move it into a system of your choice. Emily, you got some
I
thoughts?
also want to say, because I love how it's like one sheet games, and I'm putting links to this in the chat. Is Pride and Extreme Prejudice. And its
Yes.
sisters, Mecca, fighting the French, dealing with boring men. It's a really fun game. I really recommend how it's stuff in general. He does these beautiful one sheet zine-esque outlines. I really recommend that one. He also has come out recently with a version where I can use my very few 40K in Warhammer figures, because I never could invest in a whole army. But he has one where I can take like my 5 figurines and do something. So that's really good. I'll also mention that Good Society, as you can see, gets blended really well with other systems. Court of Fame Flowers is mixing Dungeons and Dragons 5e with Good Society. And there are people, the Story Brewers people have mentioned this. They have a very active Discord if people are looking for people to play with. Where there's some campaigns where they will do like a D&D campaign, and then like every other week or something, bring in a Good Society one to really build out the characters and the character relationships. And blending systems are really great. Like some people use a quiet year to to set up their world. Like there's a lot of different ways you can mix your games, and those are really great. So for the sake of time, we might go a little bit over, but I don't want to go into Tiffany Cruz's time. We have a question from Austin. How, if has your academic work propped up in your TTRPG playing? Em and I will leave out the fact that we play with other 18th century scholars. So debates have ensued over certain things.
So I actually use TTRPG as my way not to be in grad school. Because one of the things I learned early on was that, like, if your grad school friends are your only friends, then like sometimes your world gets so insular that you can't see outside of it. Which I think is true for any, but I'm just currently in grad school. So where it's cropped up actually is being the person who, when somebody says like a particular niche thing that relates to my work, I'm like, okay, do you want the like actual explanation of this, or we just like, we don't want to go into it. So, and part of where that's cropped up the most is in playing previously games of Vampire the Masquerade. My other hat that I wear is queer theory with an emphasis on HIV and AIDS history. And so it's been interesting playing those games and talking to my friends when we play it about certain choices that were in some of the original books that aren't in like the 5th edition that's now blown up thanks to, you know, LA by Night and now New York by Night. So I think that's how it comes up, but it's for me, my TTRPG playing when I play with other people is far more about, I would like to have a world in which my academic stuff doesn't get too heavy involved, but I'm lucky also to have people that I play with who are like, oh no, tell me more, give me a little bit more. So that's where it's cropped up for me.
Sylvan?
I think so I kind of have a blend of different things, but I run as a dungeon master for a ladies' night, and so it's really fantastic to kind of give that space of inclusivity. Not that I used to focus a lot on environmental feminisms. I haven't focused that as much recently, but that was always very nice. But I think for me, I'm obsessed with world building. So I think that kind of, no matter what game I'm playing, whether, I'm running it or, with a group of friends, I'm always like, okay, but I need to know what's going on in the world. What connections do we have? And so that's been fantastic.
And Austin, do you want to answer your question?
Oh, sure. I can answer very quickly. I think very similar to Sylvan. That's where I've typically used it. I run the campaigns I run are exclusively for non-academics, and so it's always fun to pick some relatively obscure stories that are maybe well known among our peers in our work, and then introduce them in a fantastical, absurd way to some people who may be unfamiliar.
Yeah. And we've got a question. We've answered a little bit of how to incorporate Austin and Regency into their games. So for the purposes of time, I do want to come to the question of other actual plays, other live performed role-playing games that are on your respective radars that you'd like to, in this time when we are supporting independent media now more than ever, are there ones that are of particular interest to you beyond the kind of Dimension 20 sphere? I'm seeing head nods.
I feel like I'm the first person to answer every time.
No, you're fine, E.
Okay.
Go.
I am the consummate extrovert in every group, so this is just how I think. I think Worlds Beyond Number is hands down one of the best things that's come out in actual play. Like, I don't know. I just think I know it doesn't need my promo. They've got like 30,000 backers. But if you are somebody, what made me think of it was, Sylvan, you talking about world building. I have never experienced a show in that short of amount of time that's able to so clearly and concisely build a world. And I also think their Fireside is doing important things with thinking about production and behind the scene choices that I think we get in things like Four-Sided Dive, but we weren't getting those things necessarily as clearly from the beginning. And so I think with Worlds Beyond Number, what we get is they're coming at this very particular moment in actual play as a genre where they're benefiting from almost coming in, I don't want to call it like second generation, that's not the right term, but they're almost like at the precipice of this like phase, if they're like the phase 4 MCU kind of thing. It feels like they're moving in that direction.
Yeah, we've had several waves of actual play, and I think it's fair to say that they're another generation is not what we want to call it, but
Yeah, that's not the right word. But especially if you're somebody who podcasts, I highly recommend. So
I love that, definitely. I don't know if I have any recommendations outside. I've been catching up. I was a little bit late on watching Dimension 20, so I've been catching up quite a bit on on all of the previous seasons. So that's been kind of my space lately.
is there another one that you think you're going to be paying close attention to in the future among the Dimension 20 seasons?
Oh, as far as the seasons, so I just got into Fantasy High sophomore year. So I have been doing that. I'm probably gonna jump into Unsleeping City. So yeah, very excited for that. I've heard many great things. So
Yeah. I think there's a lot for you to chew on. I say as just totally disclosure, Austin is Emily's graduate student, Sylvan is mine, and we split custody of E, even though neither of us supervise. So this is all in the family, academically speaking, so to speak. Austin, what are you listening to or watching?
Yeah, I mean, I think one that doesn't necessarily need my shout out is Not Another D&D Podcast. Is fantastic, but very well beloved and known in the space. A one that I got into recently, actually, thanks to the two Dr. Emily's, is Party. I think Party of One is a podcast that I was introduced through to the two of them, which is very good. And then a little bit smaller one is called Adventure is Nigh from The Escapist. I got into that through their video game company that does video game critique and things of that nature. It is far from the cleanest, meaning like it is not as polished as a Dimension 20 or a Critical Role, but sometimes that messiness I actually really like on Adventure is Nigh, because it can be sort of nice to feel more like, oh, this is like a home campaign rather than a production that you're watching.
Yeah, I mean, and there's so much more that we can say about the ways in which we are in a quickly not fracturing, but differentiating form when we talk about actual play. Couple final recommendations as we round out today. If you are interested in and inspired by Court of Fey and Flowers, you can watch the first episode here on YouTube, and then you have to pay a mere $5 for the month to watch the rest of the thrilling season. Very much worth the price of admission. And if you do like Good Society as a system and would like to see some other folks take it on, My First Dungeon has a very limited podcast series. They are big devotees of the Worlds Beyond Number crew, so they are also a kind of highly produced podcast actual play. And Dungeons and Daddies did a Patreon version, Sons and Sensibility. And for those who are very much sticklers to Regency authenticity, Sons and Sensibility will probably not be to your taste, although they did try really hard. But if you do want something that's stupidly funny, you definitely want that. Um, this conversation will go on. We look forward to hearing more questions in the comments and places where we can find folks. We will be keeping this link and the link to the presentations updated with any future publications that these stellar scholars bring out, because we know there are some coming. And we'll finally recommend to you one more place to go on YouTube, starting in just another, oh my goodness, week. Generation Analog will be doing other presentations, including a bunch on actual play on their YouTube channel, and we will put that link in the show notes as well. Thank you all very much for joining us, and do not miss the next and final presentation here at Virtual JaneCon.
And Tiffany
Thank you
Cruz
very much.
is, I'm going to put that link in here now before I forget. But
Yeah.
everyone, thank you